Well, hello everybody and welcome to another episode, and we've got a slightly mixed bag for you today, due largely to the fact that the stuff that I'd ordered for this week's episode, namely this beautiful little Fuji X-T100 mirrorless camera here, and the various lenses that are going to form the basis of the episodes in the weeks following that, didn't turn up in time, didn't turn up till Thursday actually, and it really does take me at least a week to get to know a camera or a lens and get a few notes down on paper so that I can bring you all the info on them. So we're going to talk about what's coming up. We're also going to have a look at news on the lens repair updates. We've got various lens projects, two main ones of which are this 20mm CZJ Flectagon here, which is undergoing sort of what's turned out to be a rather slow repair. And we've also got news on this Mamiya 50mm SX lens, which if you saw the episode, I don't know, 3 or 4 episodes ago, maybe 2 or 3 episodes ago, you'll know I tried to fit on a standard M42 adapter, couldn't get it to fit, wouldn't mount flush, couldn't get infinity focus, and also the aperture ring was binding. We've got the perfect solution for that supplied by a viewer, more on that shortly. In addition to all of that stuff, we are going to look at some actual things that make images, namely this wonderful little infrared filter that cost me £20 and will make you infrared images on any digital camera. We're going to have a look at this wonderful, and it really is wonderful, Nitecore electronic lens and sensor blower that was sent to me by Pergia, and this is a wonderful thing. It's got a maximum airspeed, claimed maximum airspeed of 43 miles per hour. There it is in its little box, so we'll be having a look at that shortly. Now then, we do have a very interesting thing to look at next. It's a very cheap, well, when I say very cheap, cost me £20. It's a 720 nanometer infrared filter. So let's just have a little look. It's nothing particularly special to look at. It's pretty much like any old filter that you've seen before, apart from the fact that when you look at it, it looks totally black, and that is because it prevents pretty much all visible light from getting through it, and it allows only infrared light through in the 720 nanometer range, and as I understand it, that's right on the border of infrared and visible light. I might be wrong, do correct me in the comments box if I'm wrong, but the idea of this filter is that it cuts out almost all the visible light, and so most of what comes through is infrared. That is at the high end of the infrared spectrum. So it doesn't capture all of the IR spectrum. It's not quite the same as a camera that you get with an infrared filter removed. Every digital camera has an infrared filter over its sensor. You can get those removed and then you get a pure IR image, but this is pretty near to that. You can get some very cool images with these, even though it doesn't see the whole infrared spectrum. It sees a bit of visible light, but really not too much. Now, this filter needs very strong light. As you can see, as you've already seen, it looks completely black. If you look through it, so you're going to need a pretty high ISO setting on your camera, and you're also going to need some very strong light, and you will need a longer exposure than usual. You'll need a fast lens as well. This is a 55mm filter, and I used it on the 55mm f1.2 Olympus Zuiko that happens to have a 55mm thread, and that is now going to appear on the table as if by magic right in front of me. And here it is. So the filter just goes on the front there, screws on the front, just in the same way that any other filter you might have used would do. So you do need a fast lens, you do need strong light, and you do need high ISO. I stopped this one down to f2 because it's really soft at f1.2, so it works much better at f2 and it gives much nicer and much sharper images. But with strong light on a good bright summer day and a high ISO setting of 6400, I think it was, that I used, I could use a shutter speed of 1/60th of a second or so, occasionally more if the light was really bright. It's a good idea to take a tripod with you though, because the light can vary and your shutter speeds are often going to be slower, and 1/60th is just about as slow as you'd want to go with a 50mm or so lens. Now, I found it very tricky at first, and I did have to get used to shooting this filter, but eventually I got some very nice shots with characteristic light foliage and dark skies. So we are getting plenty of genuine infrared light through here. This is not just a red filter that makes things look a bit infrared-ish. This is the real thing. What comes through this filter is infrared light, and you can have hours of fun playing around with the sliders in Photoshop or GIMP or whatever image editing software you've got. You can play around with hue. That's quite rewarding. I found that it worked better to get traditional black and white infrared images. It worked better not to shoot in black and white. I didn't have a great deal of success shooting in black and white, so I shot in colour and then desaturated, and did have to do a little post-production, but you can see by these results that you do get some really quite stunning images just from this really simple little bit of glass that costs a few pounds or dollars. So I think this is a pretty neat little thing for 20 quid, and I got some really nice images for it. From it. I had loads of fun playing around with it. Slightly shaky start, but soon got used to it, and eventually I even could get the focus peaking working as well. I could just about see the peaking working as well, so that's a real useful aid to have. Lots of fun, very cool, very cheap, and very enjoyable too. The Mamiya lens we've had really good success with the help of viewer George Kelly, who has done something magnificent. What he's done is he's taken, let me show you in close up, he's taken an ordinary M42 adapter, and what he's done, you'll see this lens is now sitting perfectly flush on it, and we've also got the ability to change that aperture. What George has done, George has a lathe, and this is really the best solution. My solution of possibly grinding off the little pin that was preventing it from sitting flush, and there's that little pin there. I don't know if you can see it just by my finger right there. That was preventing it sitting flush on the ordinary adapter. What George has done, he's taken the requisite distance off the edge of the adapter, he's turned that off on his lathe. He's made a groove next to that, which I'm putting my fingernail into right now. That's a groove that the pin sits in, and he's also taken some metal off just off the edge of the adapter here, so that the aperture ring doesn't bind, and he's done a very, very brilliant job on this lens, so that we can now screw on our SX lens. It sits fully home. We can turn the adapter. The aperture works no problem. I don't know if you can see that working there, but it's all working fine. So that is a really, really good repair, and I'll be bringing you the results from that very shortly in an upcoming episode. Now, before I put this lens back on, let me show you this blower. This really is quite something. You sit there for a minute, lens. Okay, so here's the blower in its little box. It comes in this very nice little presentation box, and if I just pull it out you come, fella. There we are. There is the blower, and it has a filter on this side, and those filters are replaceable. The one that it comes with, that comes attached to it, is the blower for cleaning lenses. So let's give this Mamiya a little clean just before we put it back onto the Sony. We don't want it getting dust into the Sony. So there we are. There's the throw at the lens. So there's a little button here. If you push it once and hold it, then it stays on until you let go. If you push it twice and hold it, it stays on until you push it again. So let's give this Mamiya lens a nice clean so we don't get any dust onto the sensor of our lovely A7. So that really is quite a gust that comes out there, and I can quite believe that the maximum airspeed is 43 miles per hour, because it really is quite a jet that comes out of it. So before we put that lens on there, we're going to make sure that our sensor of our lovely old Sony A7 here is nice and clean, because it's been sitting there exposed to the elements, gathering all manner of dust. So here is the filter that is for cleaning lenses, and all we do is we just turn that, twist it off, and we put on, if I can get it out of the box, we put on the new filter, which has a blue cover to distinguish it, and we just pop it on there and turn it until it locks. And this filter has a much finer filter, so you're not going to get anything really other than the most microscopic particles coming through onto your sensor, and they're not going to cause any problem anyway. So that really is going to give your sensor a jolly good clean. So let's get our Sony A7, and despite the fact that this is now a fairly old camera, I still hold it in very high esteem. This is a full frame mirrorless camera, and that's a pretty cool technical achievement. So let's make sure it's a nice clean technical achievement. So here we go. So there we are. Now both sensor and lens should be cleaned to within an inch of their lives, and we shouldn't get any annoying dust or any problem particles inside our camera. And this really is a useful device. I've got one of those, bulb squeezy blowers, but it doesn't get anywhere near the speed that this one can get to. This one can give a really fast jet, and I really can't believe those claims of top speed. And even if it's not exactly as the manufacturers claim, which I've no reason to think it's not, but even if it's not, it's still a very fast, very efficient jet of air. So that's really going to keep all your gear clean, and it's, I think, far better than any of those handheld blowers that you can get. Now, which way does it go back in the box? There we go. So I'm going to be using that on all my lens repair projects, and in fact every time I change a lens I'm going to give the sensor a quick squirt with that. So that's a really useful piece of kit which I'm going to make plenty of use of. Right, let me now go into a little bit more detail about what we've got coming up, because I think you're going to like it. The first thing we've got coming up, and this will be in next week's show, is this delightful little Fujifilm X-T100. Let me just show you this camera a little more closely, just as a little bit of a teaser. Here it is, and it's a really beautiful little camera. It's actually slightly smaller than some of the other XT SLRs that I've used, but it's none the worse for that at all. It fits into my hand very, very nicely. It's very, very nice to carry and to use. There's the top plate. You can see it's a little different. It doesn't have the shutter speed dial. It does have an exposure comp dial, and it's got one wheel here at the back, just on the top there. So it lacks the two wheels of its bigger brethren and relations, the XT1, the XT2, the XT20 and so on. But it's a lovely, lovely little camera. I wasn't too sure about it at first when I bought it, because it doesn't have an X-trans sensor. It has instead an ordinary conventional Bayer sensor. All of the other Fujifilm cameras I've used, the X-T1, the X-T2, the XEs, the X Pro 1, all have had a X-trans sensor of some kind, where the pixels are arranged slightly differently than in the traditional Bayer sensor. This camera has a traditional Bayer sensor, not an X-trans sensor, but having said that, I think it makes some really, really nice images, and I was very pleasantly surprised with the performance of this camera. So please do look out for this camera, the review on this camera coming up in next week's show. We've got some Tokina short zooms coming up, as I said earlier, 35 to 70, and there's also a 28 to 70 on the way, hasn't arrived yet. We've got this lovely Vivitar 50mm 1.7 lens, and we're going to see how that compares to other 50mm. I'll just give you a cheeky quick look at it, just so you can see it. There it is. It's looking pretty good. The coatings are looking pretty nice. How well it performs, well, we'll have to see. It's a bit of an underdog. It's a third-party lens, so I hope it does well. I always support the underdogs, and I hope this one does well. But whether it does or not, well, I guess time will tell. We've also got the Yashica 35 Electro GT coming up. It's a fantastic looking camera, and it really reminds me of the X Pro 1 and cameras of that ilk. In fact, it's cameras like the Electro that the X Pro 1 is sort of harking back to. So we've really come full circle, I guess, in that direction. I'm going to go out and shoot it, and then I'm going to go and then I'm going to compare it to all the rangefinders, just to see what it's all about, just to see how it compares. I'm hoping it's going to be pretty nice. It's got a beautiful Yashica Yashinon 50mm f1.7 on it, but again, time will tell and we will see. We're also going to be having a look at some daylight developing tanks. One of them is the Rondinax. That's a rather old device, but still good, from the 1950s, 1960s sometime, I think. The Rondinax 35U, and that's a completely dark container. You don't need any darkness at all. You can load that in daylight, develop in daylight, and that's a very good thing. And we're going to be comparing it to the Joby developing tank and see how they work. And now, finally, of course, I did mention George Kelly's magnificent adaptation of an M42 adapter. He has hacked this so that it works on this Mamiya lens. I've already shown you that. That's coming up as well. So that's the outline of things to come. But tell me what you want to see. What would you like to see first? What do you want to see? Do you want to see some more film stuff? Do you want to see some more lenses? Do you want to see more cheap mirrorless cameras? Tell me in the comments box below, and if I'm able to, I will make it for you. When I began the channel, I think it was around about 2013, I wasn't entirely sure why I was starting it. I was a fan of the new mirrorless cameras that were, well, relatively new at the time. In fact, I was fascinated by them and I could see their potential. But I was also very much into Leica, Zorki and Fed rangefinders at the time, because I learned photography on a Fed rangefinder in the late 70s. So my first vintage lenses were the Russians, the Jupiter 8, the Industar 61 and the Helios 44 that I had as well from a Zenit B. I had a GH2 first, but that had no peaking, and to be honest, I never really liked the way the images looked. The colours were always a little bit off for me. So when I saved up a little money, I bought a Sony A7, this Sony A7 right here. And I just kind of built up a collection of lenses as time went by. I almost never shot the kit lenses from the mirrorless cameras. I was blown away, far too blown away, by the astonishing results I was getting from the old lenses I was using, the Helios, the Jupiter, the Industar, and later other ones that I used. I was really delighted and fascinated by this mixture of the old and the new that mirrorless cameras and old lenses could offer. In fact, I was so pleased by this idea that I thought other people might be interested in it too. So I guess that's really why I started the channel. And judging by the interest that there is in pairing mirrorless cameras with these very old lenses, I'm not on my own in this interest, and I'm very glad to say that others are interested too. It really is a fascinating, fantastic hobby and a very, very fascinating thing for me to do. So I guess that's about it from me for this week. Next week, stay tuned, tune in, don't miss the Fuji X-T100 review. Beautiful little camera. I think you're going to like it. We've got all sorts of lenses coming up, as I say, but for now, all that remains for me to do is to remind you, please, not to forget to like, subscribe and ring the jolly old bell before you go. And if you like the content on this channel and you'd like to support it and to help it grow and to develop, then you can do that at patreon.com/Zenography, and you can do that for as little as $1 per month. As ever, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you with the Fuji X-T100 next time for a little more Zenography.